Ask any LEGO Star Wars fan when they think the theme peaked, and most of them, at least online, will probably tell you 2013. But was it actually the best year? Or is it just nostalgia making us think it was? To find out, I went through Bricksets database and I looked at every single set released in every year of LEGO Star Wars since it began. I then judged the selection of sets released within each year and presented my findings in the only way I know how, a tier list. As I'm writing this, the script is nearly 9,000 words long, so this will probably be an extremely long and somewhat repetitive video. If you want to join me on this journey through the years, then thank you. That's really nice. Let's jump into it, starting in 1999, where we have the first year of LEGO Star Wars coinciding with the release of The Phantom Menace. What surprised me most about this year was that there was only 13 sets released total, and because of the huge hype around the first new Star Wars movie in 15 years, 8 out of these 13 sets were based on The Phantom Menace. You honestly have a great set selection here. You got your classics like the X-Wing, TIE Fighter, Y-Wing, Snowspeeder, and Luke's Landspeeder of course, alongside some fairly decent Phantom Menace sets like the Gungan Sub and the Mos Espa Pod Race. Unfortunately, some of these sets were extremely basic. The Landspeeder, Droid Fighter, and Sith Infiltrator, while not offensively bad, just do not hold up at all to the test of time. Also, while the Darth Maul, Jar Jar, and Vader figures were actually pretty ahead of their time, and I would even say decent, the extremely simple face prints on yellow skin of other figures and the weirdly tall child Anakin figure really hold this year back for me. For those reasons, I'm going to put it at C tier. 2000 was the first year that they introduced the Ultimate Collector Series line, with the TIE Interceptor and the X-Wing. These sets looked incredible on the box arts, mainly because they put this grayscale filter over them, which was pretty misleading. Sure, the colors are inaccurate, the builds are potentially fragile, and the shaping is pretty blocky, but no Star Wars sets at the time even came close to the scale and level of detail, so you have to give some credit where it's due. This year also saw the introduction of minifigure packs, which was a pretty cool concept where each figure has its own stand and what looks like background cards. The Luke, Han, Boba version doesn't really hold up great because of the yellow skin, but the others aren't bad. The droid one is straight up equivalent to a modern set even. They also introduced these buildable Technic droids this year with a pit droid, battle droid, and a droidica, which look pretty good honestly. The droidica especially doesn't look 24 years off what I would expect next year. The playsets had some okay highs, but some low lows. The Falcon looks pretty bad honestly. The B-Wing is super scrawny with a pointless side build, and the A-Wing is also just super blocky, but the Trade Federation AAT genuinely looks almost as good as, if not better than, the 2020 version. The rest of the sets generally just look blocky and under-detailed, but not the worst. This year also had easily the worst minifigure LEGO has ever made, with this cursed Aldar Beedo figure. Like, Jesus Christ, what the hell is even that? Like, why even bother if it's that far off? Lots of ideas to praise, honestly. The execution of these ideas are what holds this year back for me. So I'll also put it at C tier, but above 1999 because of the UCS sets. 2001 only had 10 sets, which is the lowest amount of any year of LEGO Star Wars, and I'm sorry to say, these just weren't that good. The UCS Rebel Blockade Runner looks genuinely great. Watto's Junkyard looks really decent too, and the Imperial Shuttle is shaped really well. The rest of the sets are super small and simple, and the Darth Maul bust is kind of cursed. But undeniably, the worst aspect of this year was that they continued the Technic Droids sub-theme from the previous year. They put out the C-3PO, which looked a bit strange, and the Stormtrooper, which is just straight up awful and doesn't even make any sense to include in the sub-theme because he's not even a droid. Yeah, overall it was just a super small and hugely flawed year for LEGO Star Wars with only 1 or 2 redeeming qualities. It also had basically no minifigures, so if there was ever a year that deserved D tier, it's this one. I can't imagine it getting any worse. 2002 was the year Attack of the Clones came out and had 3 UCS sets, which might be the most of any year of LEGO Star Wars ever. The UCS Imperial Star Destroyer was absurdly ahead of its time and holds up really well even today. The buildable Yoda, and the 3rd UCS set was the Naboo Starfighter, which was only like $40 and honestly shouldn't even count as a UCS set, but it was pretty cool, I guess. Beyond that, we had some banging Episode 2 sets like the now legendary Republic gunship containing Jedi Bob, the only Jango Fett's Slave 1 ever made, which is fucking absurd if you think about it. The Bounty Hunter Pursuit set with the only Zam Wesell minifigure ever made, the first Jedi Starfighter set, a Dooku vs Yoda duel set, and, incredibly, a set based on when Anakin went and slaughtered the village of Sand People. They don't make them like they used to, huh? Damn liberals, we used to be a real country. The builds this year also generally improved by a huge degree over 2001. With all that said, they were still using yellow as a skin tone this year, which really ruins a lot of these figures for me, and they still put out got some stinkers with the UCS Yoda and the Technic buildable characters, even though the Super Baldroid wasn't the worst thing ever. Overall, I'm going to put it at B tier because I think the high peaks are almost perfectly cancelled out by the fairly many low valleys. 2003 had 24 sets, but a surprisingly high number of these were part of this mini building sets subtheme that either contained some ships slightly larger than advent calendar size, or just these kind of microfighter sized builds-ish. Not a bad concept, but with 0 minifigures, some wacky proportion, and the fact that they took up such a huge portion of the catalogue, I don't know, it just ain't it. This year only had one UCS set, that being the first Snowspeeder. Similar to the Imperial Star Destroyer, this set was extremely good for its time and honestly still kind of holds up. But probably the most notable set this year was the now ludicrously expensive Cloud City set, whose value comes from the fact that it included the one and only classic Boba Fett figure with arm printing. It retailed for just $100 and is now going for over $5,000. Christ. This year also had this AT-AT, this AT-TE, and this Hailfire droid, which all had builds that are such a step up in complexity I couldn't believe they were all from 2003. Generally, with the builds this year, it feels like this was the turning point in build complexity where sets were getting way more accurate, but you still had some stragglers lagging behind like the Skyhopper, the TIE Bomber, and to a degree Jabba's Palace, which still have that super blocky, simplistic vibe that the first few years had. This year also generally saw a huge step up in minifigure quality too. The Cloud City Boba Fett was the first minifigure ever made to have arm printing, for example. We also got our first job of the hut mold, and these Geonosian minifigures, which look absurdly good to me for some reason. With all that said, I don't think such a huge chunk of the catalogue can justifiably be taken up by the mini builds like that. And with the minifigures still pretty simple for the most part and still using that yellow skin tone, I think this is also a B tier for me for the same reasons as the previous year. 2004 only had 15 sets and unfortunately again had a load of those mini building sets taking up a huge chunk of the catalogue. Beyond that, the sets on offer were pretty boring and almost entirely just remakes of sets they'd done already, like the TIE Fighter and Y-Wing set, the Snowspeeder and the Falcon. The Cantina set is probably the highlight for me, mainly because of that dewback, the Greedo with printed arms, and the hugely improved Landspeeder. Many will point to the TIE Fighter collection as the highlight maybe, but I personally don't like the set because the colours are way off to me and the builds feel really simple and outdated considering the quality of what's around it. The most noteworthy thing about this year was that it was the first time Caucasian characters used light nougat as a flesh tone, as opposed to just yellow, which was probably the single best change LEGO have ever made. The UCS Y-Wing was also quite good. Beyond that, I think the sets were just way too limited and just overall boring. And for that reason, I'd honestly give it a D tier too. This was just not enough. If they came out with a wave even half this bad today, I'd completely lose faith in the company. 2005 was a big year because it was the year Revenge of the Sith came out, and that definitely shows with almost every set this year being based on the movie. You had some really cool playsets like the Ultimate Space Battle, the Clone Scout Walker, a Clone Turbo Tank, and an ARC 170 to name a few, but outside of those, the playsets didn't quite have the polish I'd have liked or expected. Like if you look at the AT-AT from the previous year and you compare it to the Sandcrawler this year, you can't help but feel like it's a step backwards in the detail and texturing department. Similarly, if you look at the General Grievous Chase set, the build is mostly comprised of really large specialized pieces, which is generally not something that makes for a fun set. They also re-released another TIE Fighter with the same basic design for the billionth time, which I was super surprised to see, since it's still rocking that black and blue color scheme, which I consider to be wildly inaccurate. And the minifigures, while much more detailed than before, and finally rocking the light nougat flesh tone all around, just don't look right. There's something about the Anakin figure in particular that I just really hate, honestly, and even the Obi-Wan is it's just wrong. They included light-up lightsabers for Anakin, Obi-Wan, Mace Windu, and Luminara this wave, which was pretty innovative and a cool idea, but I just don't vibe with the execution of the rest of these figures. I think they just look off. This year did give us the UCS Death Star 2 though, which is quite noteworthy. Overall, I'm going to give this year a B. I'd love to put it higher because it was the Revenge of the Sith wave, but I can't really justify it because the sets themselves are still pretty flawed and in desperate need of some ironing out. 2006 again had a surprisingly low set count with just 14, with 2 of them being UCS sets. This also happened to be the year that I started getting these sets as a child, so quite a few of them I am incredibly biased towards because of nostalgia. In particular, the V-Wing, the Slave One, Jabba Sail Barge, and the Imperial Star Destroyer are all sets that I played with a lot as a kid, and I sincerely love for that reason, but I'll try to ignore that. Taking off the nostalgia goggles though and looking at these sets objectively, I still think this is an incredibly solid year for LEGO Star Wars. The build quality for every set has reached a stage where none are blocky or simple, and I can sincerely say that all of these sets are really well shaped and detailed. The selection of sets is really good too, with nothing but pure, honest-to-God playsets. No mini-building sets, no Technic droids, no gimmicks, just LEGO playsets with good builds and a fairly good minifigure selection. There are an annoying amount of minifigures that just have plain smiley smiley faces, and some characters like Princess Leia look incredibly outdated and weird. Han and Luke as well I think badly needed a new print at this stage, with Luke still rocking pretty much the same face print since 2000 even. The TIE Interceptor is the only blemish on this year for me, since it still had that inaccurate color scheme and really blocky design that feels almost unchanged since 1999. The two UCS sets with the ATST and Vader's TIE Advanced kind of have the same problem as the Y-Wing and Snowspeeder to me, in that they do look good and have solid shaping and details, but they just desperately need a modern revamp. The ATST in particular badly needs some tiling just to break up these walls of studs and add some variety to the texture. Overall, I really loved this year in particular, and I'd love to put it in A tier, but the whole point of this video is to examine these years excluding any nostalgia, so I will sadly put it in B tier. I think the set selection is easily A tier, and the build quality is leagues better than previous years, but the minifigures were just not good enough for me to put it in A, where I imagine a good few years will end up. 2007 was a pretty big year because it was the first year to contain battle packs, with the Droids and Clone Troopers battle packs. It was also the year of the first UCS Millennium Falcon, the motorized AT-AT, and the much-loved Trade Federation MTT. Outside of those, and leaving any childhood-driven personal preference aside, this year was extremely similar to 2006 in the sense that its figures were still overly simple, but the builds were interesting, relatively complex, and varied. They also still put out a TIE vehicle that looks like shit with the TIE Crawler, which at this point I just don't understand at all, because they made Vader's TIE Advanced the correct grey and black colour scheme the previous year, yet this is still blue? I don't get it, and I don't like it. It's a good year overall. I'd put it in B tier again, but above 2006 because of the introduction of the battle packs and the better UCS sets. 2008 really surprised me in that it's actually incredibly good in the grand scheme of things. This was the year that the Clone Wars TV show first aired, as well as the year that the Force Unleashed video game came out, and so almost all of these sets were based on those. I think the main thing people will point to as a bad decision by LEGO from this year would be the design of the Clone Wars characters' faces, but honestly, looking back, I disagree. With the added context of knowing just how simple and a lot of times inaccurate the minifigure faces were at this time, I actually think the Clone Wars face prints made a lot of sense for them to do. Like, 2007 didn't have great minifigure faces. In fact, they were still rocking the same super outdated and ridiculously simple prints they had been for like 5 years at this point. And the characters in the Clone Wars have such distinct designs that it would have been awful to try and simplify them down that much. If this video has done nothing more, it has at the very least allowed me to appreciate these Clone Wars faces a lot more than I did. If you too have found enlightenment as I have done and now appreciate the Clone Wars faces, then there are a lot of sets to love here. There's an ATTE that looks great, a Republic gunship with insane minifigures, a V-19 Torrent, and not to mention the sets that look like they were ripped straight out of 2019, like the AT-AP Walker, Anakin Starfighter, Droid gunship, and the Republic fighter tank. This year also had the Rogue Shadow, which I believe is the only Force Unleashed set ever released. The UCS sets were General Grievous, which was honestly a pretty strange decision looking back, and the first unpaneled Death Star, which I'm not sure I like in hindsight, but with all the unique Clone Wars stuff that came out this year, I think I still have to conclude that this was the first truly great year of LEGO Star Wars, and so I'm putting it in A tier. The Clone Wars faces, while I have a soft spot for them now with the added context, are admittedly still quite hard to love, and there's no way I can put this in S as a result, but there's no way it's going any lower. 2009 was pretty noteworthy because it was the first and only year since 1999 which didn't have a UCS set. But it was also the year that the Republic dropship with AT-OT Walker came out, which I guess makes up for it. Beyond that, some other noteworthy sets include the first playset Tantive 4, the introduction of the ill-fated MIDI scale with the Millennium Falcon, and of course, the Venator. The set builds at this stage were all very good. From eyeballing it, you could probably release a few of these as they are today and it wouldn't feel that out of place. Unfortunately, yet again, the minifigures let this year down. I'm honestly shocked to see the same basic Leia face print still being used in sets so many years later. This is the same print from 9 years prior and it's not even good. Like, what are you doing? And for those reasons, and just the general worst selection of sets in my opinion, I'm gonna put this at B tier, but at the absolute top of it because the ships themselves are good. 2010 was important because it seemed to be the year that they revamped their minifigure face printing so that all characters have an acceptably modern face, if that makes sense. No more basic smiley faces, no more reused prints from when figures had yellow skin, just actually decent prints. This year had 2 UCS sets, and this is the first year of what I would consider to be the modern UCS era. It's like that gap in 2009 acted as a separation point between the classic and modern UCS eras, because from this point on, the UCS subtheme just felt better, with the general quality of the builds and designs being a noticeable step up from what came before it. The UCS sets this year were the widely loved Imperial Shuttle, and the only modern prequel era UCS set for what would end up being a very long time in the Obi-Wan's Jedi Starfighter. Some of other sets that caught my eye would be the Slave 1, Clone Turbo Tank, and updated Arc 170. I think this is the year that LEGO Star Wars got really good, and the quality of sets here are all high enough that I not only could display them in my collection without them looking out of place, but I actively want to. All things considered, I'm going to put this at A tier, but at the absolute bottom of it. The highlight set of 2011 is easily the single UCS set that came out that year, with the Super Star Destroyer, but it wasn't without its own array of damn good sets beyond that. Anakin and Sebulba's Pod Racers genuinely look like a better version of the Pod Racer set that came out in 2019, and even included some extremely high quality Watto and Sebulba minifigures that I don't think they could improve on even today. The Bounty Hunter Assault Gunship and the T6 Jedi Shuttle both look great and have minifigures I have gladly added to my collection even recently. There's a huge step up in quality with them in that regard that makes me rate this year very highly. I'm going to put this at the absolute top of A tier for now. Easily the best year to this point, and I think this year laid the foundation for what LEGO Star Wars will eventually become. 2012 was an extremely interesting year with quite a few god tier sets with some ridiculously valuable minifigures. First of all, this year introduced the Planet set that I think was ultimately replaced by the Microfighters, so that's cool. You had the Elite Clone Trooper and Commando Droid Battle Pack featuring the Clone Arc Trooper, which is a generally very well loved figure. You also had a few Old Republic sets like the Republic Striker class Starfighter and the Sith Fury class Interceptor, which had the now insanely valuable Darth Malgus minifigure. You also had the Gungan subset, which featured the also insanely valuable Queen Amidala minifigure, Pre-Vizsla's Mandalorian Fighter, which featured the also insanely valuable Pre-Vizsla minifigure, the legendary Palpatine's Arrest set, the Malevolent, and Jabba's Palace, which came with a new and way improved Jabba figure, and the only Boushh Princess Leia figure ever made. Even outside these incredible sets with their god tier minifigures, you had a handful of solid playsets too, with your classic X-Wing, TIE Fighter, and Y-Wing sets, and two pretty decent UCS sets with the R2-D2 and the B-Wing. This was actually an incredible year all round, and I can comfortably say that it belongs at the S tier without question. And now we have the year everyone considered the best heading into this, 2013. And you know what? After looking through the set selection, I have to say, yeah, it's absolutely goated. It's probably quicker to list the sets that aren't god tier, but let's just list a handful of highlights here for the sake of argument. The Old Republic Battle Pack, the Corporate Alliance Tank Droid featuring a modern Jango Fett, the Bark Speeder with Sidecar featuring the Phase 2 Captain Rex, Julian Geonosis featuring the only ever live-action Count Dooku, the Z95 Headhunter featuring the Bastard Pong Krell, the Rancor Pit featuring a Rancor Big Fig, the ATTE featuring the Giga Chad Coleman Trebor, the newest Republic Gunship playset, the Jedi Defender class cruiser from the Old Republic, and Jabba's Sail Barge featuring Slave Leia and Max Rebo. That's actually such an unbeatable lineup, and that isn't even including the UCS X-Wing, which was honestly only marginally worse than the newest one, and the Ewok Village set. I honestly thought that maybe people were overhyping this year, or maybe it was just nostalgia talking, but yeah, no, this will be an extremely tough one to beat, and I wasn't even collecting or thinking about LEGO at this time, so there's no nostalgia bias here either. Am I crazy in saying that the minifigures were better in 2012 though? Is that a conclusion we can draw from this at least? 2014 has a really nice selection of cheaper sets, as it saw the Planet sets replaced by the Microfighters, which it had quite a few of, and 3 battle packs. This was also the year that Star Wars Rebels came out, which I'm quite a big fan of. So we had the Phantom set, and of course probably the most sought after playset of all time with the Ghost. You also had the Republic AV7 anti-vehicle cannon, which I personally love. There was also the Coruscant Police Gunship, an AT-AT, Jedi Scout Fighter, Imperial Star Destroyer, and the UCS Sandcrawler to round out the set selection. Overall, honestly nowhere near as good of a set selection as the previous 2 years. Aside from the Ghost, I don't think any of these playsets really became anywhere near as sought after as previous years' ones. Still a great year with some great sets, but honestly I think I'm going to put it at the top of A tier. I just don't think 3 or 4 great sets can make it an S tier, honestly. 2015 is the year that The Force Awakens came out, so in spirit of the movie, LEGO put out a handful of sets that were just recolors or remakes of older sets. But beyond that, there was actually a few really cool sets nestled amidst the Force Awakens stuff. Rebels got a good few sets this year, including the Imperial Assault Carrier that I quite liked. And outside of Rebels, we even got a set based on the 2003 Clone Wars show with Anakin's custom Jedi Starfighter, which I also quite liked. The worst thing about this year in particular is the introduction of the buildable characters line. Some were decent, like Commander Cody, General Grievous, Vader, and even Jango Fett to a degree, but the sub-theme was just not it, and eventually grew to be the most memed-on sub-theme in LEGO Star Wars history. On a brighter note, they put out 4 battle packs and 6 microfighters, which gave lots of options for cheaper sets, which is something kind of sorely missing these days, honestly. But the highlight of this year was 100% 100% the 2 UCS sets which came out. The Slave one in particular is easily the most sought after UCS set of recent years, and I always loved the TIE Fighter 2 and thought it was super overlooked. I would comfortably put this year as worse than the previous one, mainly because of the buildable characters and the lack of really engaging playsets outside of battle packs. I'd still place it above 2011 though because of the quality of those UCS sets. 2016 was the year Rogue One came out, which was hype, and LEGO continued the trend of loads of battle packs and microfaders here too, which was a good, and also the buildable characters, which was not a good. Overall, 2016 was actually such a mixed year with some things to love and some things to absolutely hate. Let's start with the love. This year had the Rogue One wave, which is one I really regret not getting in on. The hover tank with Chirrut, the AT-ST with Baze, the TIE Striker, Krennic's shuttle, and the U-Wing of course. Really good wave, I don't know what else to say. You also had quite a few Rebel sets too, like the Rebel Combat Frigate with that insane Ahsoka figure, Captain Rex's AT-TE, and the TIE Advance vs A-Wing set that came out with that unique Sabine figure. Special mention to the Clone Turbo Tank too, which I absolutely loved, especially for its figures. But that's where the good things end. LEGO went hard with the buildable characters this year. It just wasn't a good sub-theme. More damningly, this year had 2 UCS sets, both of which were incredibly disappointing beyond belief, and it can even be argued that neither deserved the UCS title in the first place. The UCS Assault on Hoth set had quite a few inaccuracies and came out at a time where there was no AT-AT on shelves, meaning the entire assault on Hoth was 2 snowtroopers armed with a speeder and a turret. The shield generator having just 3 engine things as opposed to 4 was probably the most egregious blunder here, but there were other issues as well. The Death Star, on the other hand, should look familiar because it was just a re-release of the exact same set from 2008 with an almost unaltered build. The main difference came in the minifigs, which all got an admittedly well-needed update, and the price, which got an €100 increase, so that just didn't sit well with fans. Both of these sets under modern classification would not be UCS sets. They'd almost definitely be Master Builder series sets. With all that said though, this was a pretty good year overall, so I'm actually going to put it above 2015 in the A tier. The UCS sets really let it down in comparison to 2015, but there's also so much more genuinely great playsets that I think makes up for it. 2017 was the year of The Last Jedi, which very much cements us in the sequel age of LEGO Star Wars. 2017 was also the year that I started collecting properly, so I joined at arguably the worst time I could have in the past 10 years. In terms of playsets, there was only really the Phantom 2 with Thrawn, Duel on Naboo, the Republic fighter tank I guess, and the Jedi Starfighter with Hyperdrive with Jango Fett that I'd consider properly good sets. Beyond that, you just had an incredible amount of sequel sets, not overly exciting original trilogy stuff, and the Freemaker adventures, which are all stuff that just didn't get me that excited. They also continued with the buildable character sub-theme, which isn't great either. Overall, despite it being the first year back into collecting for me, there just wasn't a lot to get incredibly excited about in terms of playsets. You did have the BB-8 brick-built character, which I kinda liked when it came out, and the 2 UCS sets this year were nothing short of incredible. The Snowspeeder was a remake of the set from 2003, and was a huge upgrade in every way, and the remake of the Millennium Falcon is nothing short of the holy grail LEGO Star Wars set. All things considered though, this wasn't a good year at all. The UCS sets were great, but don't salvage the year for me. I don't want to be over dramatic and say this is like a B tier, because those years actually had flawed sets, whereas this year at least had some objectively good sets that I just happened to not be interested in. So I will put this in A tier, but at the absolute bottom of it, even under 2010, which, despite the relatively low quality minifigures, I think just had a much better set selection. 2018 is the year Solo: A Star Wars Story came out, in case you somehow forgot about it. The Solo wave of sets were super underrated I think, and had some gems like the TIE Fighter, the AT Hauler / Convex transport duo, and both land speeders looked really cool as well. But beyond that, I think this year was just really bad. The buildable characters managed to limp their way into catalogs again somehow, and beyond that you just had a bunch of sequel sets, including the First Order AT-ST, more boring original trilogy stuff, with the exception of the X-Wing, which was goated, and just 2 extremely small Clone Wars sets, and no more Rebels or prequel stuff bar 1 controversial battle pack. The buildable Porg was pretty cool, but just overall, in terms of playsets at least, this year had very little to actually get excited about. This year did see the introduction of the Master Builder series sub-theme with the Betrayal at Cloud City set, and had a remake of the UCS Y-Wing as well, which I loved as a UCS set, but this UCS selection combined with the Solo wave just wasn't even close to enough to salvage the year. So I'd actually put it below 2017 at the absolute bottom of A tier. 2019 was the year of the Rise of Skywalker and The Mandalorian, but it also happened to be the 20th anniversary of LEGO Star Wars. So alongside your Rise of Skywalker sets, you also had a line of 20th anniversary edition sets that were remakes of older ones that came with a classic minifigure and a stand. Overall though, this was also just a dog shit year. Like, the sequels era of LEGO Star Wars was truly the dark ages of the hobby. The microfighters and battle pack selection started thinning out like the hair on your boy's head. You had the tried and quickly abandoned action battle sets, and just some unfathomably dull original trilogy sets. You had 3, maybe 4 prequel sets, which was a mild improvement, I guess. The Slave one was very highly regarded, and Darth Vader's castle was a very unique and cool set to get, but even these just don't have that excitement factor that something like the Ghost would have. Maybe that's just anti-recency bias, and a set or two from these years will become a classic in my eyes in the future, but I highly doubt it. Okay, maybe the AT-AP. There was only one UCS set this year with the somehow underrated Imperial Star Destroyer, and the other UCS set was rumoured to be a UCS Tantive 4, but instead they put out the €200 playset version of the ship instead, which was genuinely one of the biggest disappointments of recent years to me. Like, I didn't vibe with that set at all. And I guess you had the Droid Commander Lego Boost set too, but that was just like, whatever, like, who cares about that? It just wasn't a good year. Maybe at this point my will had been broken and beaten to a pulp by the previous 2 years, but it was very hard to actually get excited for a non-UCS set during this era. I'm gonna put it below 2018 even, because at least that had the solo sets. This had almost nothing. And then there was 2020, and you would think that with the everything that happened that year that this downward trend would continue, but no, because while the world at large was having a rough go at things, LEGO Star Wars was entering what I would consider its revival as it emerged out the other end of the sequels era of sets. LEGO began its adults welcome push with the introduction of the helmet collection and the LEGO art theme, leading to some classy LEGO Star Wars sets. The 501st Battle Pack came out, introducing a new hybrid Clone Trooper minifigure design and kickstarting a new era of clone minifigure availability alongside the AAT set with the 332nd clone and an Ahsoka figure, which was incredibly hype at the time. The Death Star Final Duel was remade with the Darth Vader with arm printing, which was our first hint at the upward trend of minifigures with printed arms in LEGO Star Wars playsets. The Razor Crest came out alongside the Child Brick Built character and the extremely solid AT-AT set. And the Master Builder series continued with the Mos Eisley Cantina set alongside the fairly underrated UCS A-Wing. Now, this year was very far from perfect. You still had far too many sequel sets stinking out the place. There was a lot of annoyance around both Anakin and Grievous' Starfighter sets because of the lack of Commander Cody and the lazy, inaccurate reuse of the Mustafar torso printing on the minifigures, but at the very least, there were nuggets of hope and seeds of excitement here. Especially with the Adults Welcome push, LEGO had given us something to be actually genuinely excited about for the first time in a few years. And for that reason, I'm going to put the set just above 2015 in the A tier, because I think 2015 had a slightly worse playset selection, and while its UCS sets were a fair bit better than 2020, I think the helmet collection just about tips the scales in 2020's favour. 2021 is when the LEGO Star Wars revival really kicked into gear for me. You had just one sequel set, which was a 4+ set nobody cared about, and then the rest of the year was filled with great sets based on mostly the Clone Wars and the Mandalorian Season 2. The year started off kinda mid with the downscaled original trilogy ships, but as it went on we got more helmets, 5 sets based on the Mandalorian, of which 3 were genuinely great. We got the Bad Batch Attack Shuttle and the Mandalorian Starfighter, which each had such amazing minifigures and fun builds. You had the brick-built Imperial Probe Droid and R2-D2, which were both super fun and really good looking sets, and of course, you had the 2 incredible UCS sets with the Republic Gunship, the first prequel UCS set in like 11 years, and the AT-AT, which is arguably the greatest LEGO Star Wars set ever made, without question top 3 anyway. This year also saw a record number of playset minifigures with printed arms, and just generally speaking, there was no absolutely awful set. I think this year comfortably surpasses 2014, and you know what? I think 2021 is S tier. The UCS sets in 2012 don't hold a candle to 2021. Sure, the UCS R2-D2 gets completely outclassed by the 2021 upgrade, and that isn't even a UCS set. I think 2012 just had 1 or 2 more great playsets to sway it in its favour, but honestly, if 2021 had 1 more good helmet set, I think it takes it. 2022 is where shit gets interesting. 2022 is my challenger, my champion to take on 2013. You had the continuation of the helmet collection, including the Mandalorian helmet, which I loved. You also saw the official introduction of the Diorama collection, which I have always maintained has the most potential of any sub-theme ever introduced in LEGO Star Wars. You did have a handful of stinkers, like the Obi-Wan vs Darth Vader, Boba Fett's throne room to a degree, and the Mando's N1 Starfighter, but every single other set released that year was really really good. Obi-Wan's Jedi Starfighter with the first Kaminoan minifigure ever made. The Dark Trooper attack set, which was a great way to get a small army of Dark Troopers to complement the single one from the light cruiser. The Republic fighter tank with a Mace Windu with printed arms, and 3 187th Legion clones which aren't even officially canon, I don't think. The Ambush on Ferrix set, which had an incredibly fun build, and also the only Andor set to date. A buildable BD1, the first and to date only set based on Fallen Order / Jedi Survivor. And, saving the best 3 for last, the best ATTE we've ever gotten, including 4 Phase 2 clones and a Phase 2 Commander Cody for the first time, the Justifier with the only Omega minifigure we've gotten, with arm printing, and the first Cad Bane figure we've gotten since like 2013, and the Inquisitor Transport Scythe with 3 Inquisitor minifigures, and the best playset build experience I think I've ever had. You also had the long overdue UCS Luke's Landspeeder, and the first hyper expensive non-original trilogy UCS set ever with the Razor Crest. Comparing 2022 to 2013, I actually had an entire section of the script written where I just justify why I think 2022 was marginally better, but then I was looking through the sets again and man, I just caught myself doubting again. So I decided to make a mood board type thing where I took any particularly good set I find in either year, bunch them together and just see which I vibe with more. I think if you were to give me the choice between all the sets and figures on the left and all the sets and figures on the right, I think I'm taking the ones on the right. This may be my boldest take, but I genuinely think that 2022 was the best year for LEGO Star Wars. Unless 2023 has anything to say about that. In 2023, we got 2 extremely good clone battle packs based on fan favorite legions, some Mandalorian Season 3 sets, including the Spider Tank, which features 2 of the highest quality minifigures in LEGO Star Wars history, the best wave of the helmet collection to date, including a Phase 2 Captain Rex helmet, the return of the MIDI scale sets with the Executor, 2 pretty damn good diorama sets, 3 unbelievably good sets based on the Ahsoka show, including a remake of The Ghost, which includes a Phantom this time, and a new, unique Republic gunship to top it all off. That's not even mentioning the Yavin 4 set with 12 minifigures, the UCS X-Wing that I love, and best of all, the upcoming UCS Venator with a new Phase 2 Captain Rex minifigure. Like, that last set by itself makes this an amazing year of LEGO Star Wars already. Now, this year is not without its blemishes. The introduction of the mechs is a decision I hate with all my heart because they're ugly as shit, and also priced at such an anti-consumer level compared to the minifig blister packs. It's ridiculous. The Yavin 4 set also has a pretty simple build that I can't say I'm excited about, and there's also the cursed €210 Chewbacca set that doesn't exactly fill my heart with love either. Honestly though, looking at this year as a whole, it kind of clears 2012. I think 2023 is also better than 2013. The gun chip in 2013 is of course better, but 2023 has a straight up upgraded version of the 2013 UCS set with the X-Wing, and even though we haven't seen any pictures yet, it's safe to assume that the UCS Venator will obliterate the Ewok village in a head-to-head. Similarly, as controversial as it is to say these days, I think the new Phase 2 Rex beats the 2013 version by miles. The new Ghost beats the ATTE. The E-Wing vs Shin Hati's Starfighter beats Drek 14 Starfighter. Take your pick, the T6 Shuttle or the Fang Fighter Versus set both clear the Headhunter. The 3 helmet sets beat these 3 sets comfortably, to me anyway as an adult collector. And 2023 still has some diorama sets and smaller sets to take on the 2013 stragglers. Dare I even say that the mechs aren't even that much worse than the planet sets if you consider inflation, number of minifigures, and the number of actually usable pieces. And the battle packs are way better in 2023, without question. Like 2 droidicas in a battle pack? Really? We just accepted that? This genuinely wasn't a conclusion I was expecting to reach, but I really tried to look at each year as objectively as possible, and I think this is a tier list I can stand behind and fully believe in. We are currently living in a golden age of LEGO Star Wars that I think we will look back on in the future and wonder how we didn't appreciate it more as it was happening. I've long felt that there's never been a better time to be a LEGO Star Wars fan, and after looking at every set that they've ever made over the years since I was born, I can now assert that claim with confidence. It's a good time to be a LEGO fan, guys. Don't let the helmet holes ruin that for you. And on that note, thank you very much for watching. Please don't hate me if you disagree with my takes, and farewell.